Rajeswari agreed that maybe she could start. And her statement is that the Indian economy does not have to catch up with the West and repeat the mistakes of the developed countries. So I give the floor to you, Rajeswari.
Yeah, so this is a statement coming from a country that, right from climate change negotiations to, international aid, we are literally begging for more money, more technology from everywhere. So it should surprise a lot of people that the statement says we don't want to catch up with anybody else. We don't want to catch up with the West or catch up with the developed countries or anything. Now, what does this catch up mean? I mean, those of us who've seen some great development economists, Hajun Chang and so on, saying, kick away the ladder. Yeah, you don't have to catch up, or that catching up is not a question about climbing up the same ladder. We look at let's say the four core pillars of development economics, as somebody like Amartya Sen, India's celebrated development economist, would tell you. Yeah. So, what are the four core pillars of development economics? And the post-growth scenario tells you that, these four pillars that development economics uses in a particular way are really, let's say they do exist in India in their post-growth forms already. So what are we looking for? We don't have to go down the same path, catch up, and then get back to a post-growth scenario. We are there quite significantly there. Let me just take a couple of these pillars, at least to elaborate. The first, of course, of the four core pillars would be, industrialization. That is the sequential growth that every economy has to go through, industrial growth. Second is capital accumulation, which is supposed to be the bedrock of industrial growth and development, right? And the third is, of course, informal labor. That should be formalized and brought into the urban industrial sector and whatnot. It is basically moving idle labor, structural transformation, moving people out of rural agrarian jobs to industrial jobs. And the fourth, of course, is the role of the state. The state is supposed to invest, typical Keynesian developmental expectations. Yeah. Again, now the state is also supposed to subsidize private capital and enable markets, but that's another story that happens after the 1990s, at least significantly in India, though it was always there. We in India have the advantage of a massive artisanal, rural crafts, rural industrial opportunities, 200 million people just in the craft sector. Just imagine, just close your eyes and think about Europe and the number of people working on, let's say, small industries, small industrial jobs, manufacturing. I mean, you can count them on your fingertips compared to what we have here in this country. So the opportunities for rural, informal, that is rural industrial growth, artisanal industries that can work is massive here. And that is what a post-growth society would have. The second is, of course, capital accumulation. Not all capital is treated as capital within quotes, and as the x-axis of a neoclassical diagram or a production function. In India, we don't, the biggest fight that we had with our government and with the corporates recently was the Niyamgiri Hills case, right? People don't see hills and mountains as capital. They see them as, sources of water. They see them as nature. They revere them. There are keystone species that are worshipped. It's not just a question of a blind religiosity I'm talking about, which is, of course, very rampant in my country today. Apologies for that. I'm also embarrassed about that. But I'm talking about people seeing capital not just as financial capital, or not everything is monetized and capitalized in this country. Capital exists in multiple forms as values, not as just capital within quotes, right? There are multiple values. There is a pluriverse available already in this country. Coming back to this question of labor, informal labor, that is the workforce, 92% of India's workforce is informal and unorganized. Can you imagine that scenario in Europe? I'm certain that many of us can't, because we have moved in these countries, in the developed countries, to a formal, organized, fixed wage rate, which basically means a fixed rate of value that you get to the labor, right? That's not the case in India. There is the opportunity to do, not just multiple sets of jobs, but also to use your skills locally in locally relevant, low carbon ways, bring the skills that you have to bear on your local economy. The scale effects with local, informal, unorganized labor are already there. We just have to have the right kind of what we call rooted capital, that is responsible, accountable local capital to work with them. Anybody who's lived through this past few, months, watching our own people, our own kith and kin, moving from migrant labor, walking 300 kilometers back to their hometowns, back to their villages, will never forget that. It's a crime that we've done in this country, just a sudden lockdown and disgusting, absolutely disgusting behavior where you allow our own people to migrate within the country, walk back to their own towns, and villages. So that informal labor doesn't have to migrate to where capital is. Capital, as in rooted, small-scale, sustainable infrastructure, has to move to where labor is, right? That is what we want, and we can do that. It's just a little rethinking that in 1978-80, we had this experiment of block-level, decentralized block-level planning, which failed. There are lessons from the 1970s and 80s which are still valuable for this country. We've forgotten all that with the 1990s and liberalization. We can bring all those back. The final role is, of course, the role of the state. We're not talking about the centralized, consolidated, centralized, consolidated mode, the only mode in which our government works now. We're talking about decentralized, locally accountable systems. If you've read Ashish Kothari's Radical Ecological Democracy today, you will know what I mean about a decentralized, location-specific and accountable government where direct democracy, direct deliberative democracy works. Again, works not just as people speaking, but people speaking on behalf of nature to live within nested circles that nature provides. Stop here. Thank you very much.